Hello, as you can see today, this is a very serious video. You know that a video is serious when the YouTuber has a PNG representing themselves on the corner of the screen. Do not pay too much attention to the visuals though, this is going to be a long one, so if you just want to put this on your phone and put some headphones on and put your phone on your pocket and just listen to it like it was a podcast, that is completely fine. You aren't going to miss any amazing visuals or anything on this particular video. So, disclaimers up front, this is not my usual type of content. I usually like to talk about specific video games that I enjoy in a positive manner, and the older I get, the less critical I seem to be getting for some weird reason. Usually is the opposite, but I'm starting to enjoy video games a lot more. The more I play them, the more I enjoy them, so I rarely play a game that I don't get some enjoyment out of, that I can't get anything out of it, that I don't manage to get nothing. So I'm sure long-time viewers might be worried about this type of video suddenly showing up and then dominating the channel. Do not. We will be back to our regularly scheduled content soon. Also, I usually don't talk about my politics because I just don't find them to be very relevant to the discussion of most of the games that I talk about on this channel. And while I feel it is reductive to try to sum up a person's entire politics into being left-wing or right-wing, especially if we are just going to be talking about left-wing or right-wing in the context of US politics, which seems to always be the case when you talk about left-wing or right-wing, in the interest of not wasting your time, I'll just say up front that you wouldn't be wrong if you thought of me as the stereotypical left-wing guy that likes, universal healthcare, trans rights, and all of that. I believe in those causes, and if you don't want to watch this video anymore because of that, that is completely fine by me. That I think that's regrettable. I think I'm gonna say a lot of things that, I don't know if you're going to enjoy or not enjoy. You might be surprised, but just saying it up front, I might need to elaborate on those in order to explain some of my points. Sure, it sounds random right now, but don't worry. We'll get into why I chose to reveal that in this particular video eventually. And as a final disclaimer, I understand not everyone agrees that the word censorship is the correct one to use in this context. Some people believe censorship can only be done by the government or an authority outside of the original authors of the work, to which I say that's a fair point actually. After all, authors change their work all the time. How are we to say if they are censoring or merely editing their works? When George Lucas changed things from the original Star Wars trilogy, was it censorship? Wasn't it censorship? Well, I'm honestly not so sure, but it sure was bad. I think we can all agree he should have just let those go. But for the vast majority of the internet, what we will be discussing today is always called censorship, and people will be more familiar if I just call it censorship, so I'll refer to it as censorship. The actual word doesn't matter, I think, so much as the context in which it is being used. So if at any point you think the word censorship is too heavy, just pretend that I said editing or altering or whatever your preferred word is. The point is, Skullgirls had content, and that content has been altered, and getting that content back is tricky. I think the art book simply cannot be get back. It's a PDF that they altered permanently, and this is a mostly digital game, and the only physical copies are stuff like limited run games, physical copies of the game. And so they basically made it really, really hard for you to get the original content. And people are mad about that. And I don't think the exact word that we use today is going to change anything about that. Now, if you saw the title of this video and you thought we wouldn't be talking about Skullgirls, then I'm sorry, but you've been struck by clickbait. But not really, because this video isn't just about Skullgirls, it's about much more than Skullgirls. But that game is a good jumping off point to discuss much larger topics like censorship and or personal moral responsibility in regards to media. By the time this video comes out, I'm pretty sure the topic will have already cooled off. So you might be wondering, okay, you're late to the party, who cares about Skullgirls anymore? That's old news. But the answer that led me to still make this video anyway is the reason I think this video is important, to me at least. It's because what has happened to Skullgirls has happened before, and it will happen again. And this is essentially me trying to figure out why we live in this endless cycle where the same exact thing keeps happening over and over again, and people give the same reasons for and against, and it just never ends. It just never ends. If you like niche video games, if you like niche video game communities, then this probably feel like karma, like someone is punishing us, keeping in this endless purgatory, this endless loop that never ends. But I think, hopefully, that I can get you, dear viewer, to think about this together with me, and that maybe one day we can reach a final conclusion to this debate. But for now, let me give you my 2 cents. Or considering the length of this video, they will be like $2, I guess. Skullgirls was released on the PS3 in April 10, 2012, and the Xbox 360 the very next day. I remember it because even if I wasn't a big fighting game fan, and I'm still not like super into fighting games, Skullgirls' art style, both the character design and the Art Deco infused 1920s gangsterland scenery, all of it really caught my attention. When I saw the developer's intention of making not just a pretty good looking fighting game, but a really interesting one with tag team combat where you could even choose how many characters to bring into battle, independent of what the other guy chose to bring into battle, plus the fact that they promised and delivered one of the most comprehensive fighting game tutorials ever made, that made me grab it day one for my PS3. This game was the first time I ever saw the words mix-up and hit confirmation in an actual video game, and the first time that a game stopped to teach me about those. The first time that I properly grasped what fighting games were all about. And you know I was there day one because of a really funny incident in which, in spite of the game having one of the most detailed tutorials ever, it shipped without a command list. That's right, it shipped without a way for you to check the inputs for character moves and specials. It was hilarious, to be honest, but the developers couldn't patch it immediately because Sony and Microsoft only gave each developer one free patch for their games before they started having to pay for them, so they tried to squash as many bugs as possible before uploading the command list patch, and that incident taught me a lot. So I thank Skullgirls not only for teaching me about fighting games, but even giving an interesting inside look at the inner workings of the indie industry at the time. The game's release became a core memory for me, basically. Fast forward through time, a lot of stuff happened. The developers had a falling out with Konami, who was one of the original publishers of the game. They had to essentially move to a new company called Lab Zero Games. They were originally called Reverge Labs. Eventually, Skullgirls got a PC port, which I also bought day one. Basically, I was trying to support this little indie fighting game that could at every opportunity I had. But then you fast forward even further, and the game got censored. Damn, we fast forward too much, we gotta go back. Of course, it's not that simple. Alex Ahad, the game's main artist and arguably the father of Skullgirls, had already left Lab Zero Games by the time it got censored, and then Mike Z, the creator of the engine Skullgirls runs on and the game designer, the other dad of Skullgirls basically, he got accused of a ton of nasty stuff before the censoring. He held all of the shares for Lab Zero Games and he kicked everybody out of the director's board, presumably so he wouldn't be fired. So they picked up their stuff and left for a new company, a new company called Future Club, and soon after that mess, Skullgirls got censored. The censorship of Skullgirls was weird. They didn't censor the in-game sprites as far as I can tell, though they had already changed some of them even before this entire mess, which further muddles the water. What they seem to focus on are all the event images, or the CGs if you're a nerd, from the story mode. But they didn't only censor arguably sexual content like usual, they also censored armbands, because that might invoke fascist imagery, I guess? And they also censored police brutality? I don't get it. Hello, editing me here. It turns out that they edited a lot of stuff. They even removed voice lines. There was a little bit of stuff here and there. I don't think this actually is going to change any of the points that I'm going to talk about further in this video, but in the interest of clarity, I am going to link to a video that shows all of the changes in order for you to see all of them one by one and see what you think about those. Well, moving on, Twitter got mad about it because of course they did, that's what they do. So let me sum up the two main arguments that happened on there so you don't have to lose any brain cells actually looking for them. The first argument goes like this. Person A is mad about the censorship and they say that it's not okay to take away content once a customer already paid for the game. Person B says, well, the content was gross sexist stuff, so censorship good, and I will keep supporting the game. Person A then replies, wait, so you mean you were supporting the game knowing it had that kind of content in it? Doesn't that make you gross and sexist? And person B then proceeds to throw baseless insults at person A, and person A starts doing the same, assuming of course they didn't just block each other and ended the conversation right there. The second argument that I saw the most was that a person A says that this is the author's work, and thus if they feel the need to change it later, they are entitled to do so. And person B points out that actually the two main creative leads behind this game left the company, and they are not the ones approving of the censorship. Person A then says that it's good that they are out of the company because they were sexist or something else nasty, so now whoever is left can do proper good work. Then person B asks if it's still okay that they censored it since they are not, the actual authors. So person A proceeds to throw baseless insults at person B, and person B starts doing the same, yada yada yada, you get the point. Those were the two most common arguments that I saw. Well, the most common logical arguments. There was also a lot of just name calling going on basically, but I would be lying if I said that there was a name calling even in these previous arguments before they reached their endpoint, so yeah. I'm sure there were some good takes, or at least food for thought hidden somewhere in there, but Twitter and all social media websites really trade in outrage, so those are the sorts of opinions that boil to the top. There was also a lot, and I mean an insane amount of gatekeeping, with people wanting to manually check how many hours in Skullgirls you had and if you were an active part of the community before you were allowed to have an opinion. Like, I said it before, I was here from day one and I supported the game financially whenever I could, even when I didn't have much time to play it. So yeah, I'm not a part of the active community playing it online, and if you taking my opinion into account is contingent with hours played, then I don't have many hours either, and that is unfortunate, for me at least, but I hope you stick around anyway. So basically it wasn't pretty, and it left a lot of people mad. Also, full disclosure, if those examples sound biased, it's because I am biased, like everybody else in this world. I disagree with the censorship of Skullgirls, and I have not seen a single argument that personally convinced me that it was something that needed to be done. Especially to the point of erasing all content from the original art book even. What's the point of looking at the concept art of a game if you edit it later? That's technically not concept art anymore, is it? What I mean to say is, today I want to make an argument in good faith. I want you to know that this video, for whatever that's worth, comes from deep within my heart. So I want to disclose my own biases and be honest. And if you want to tune out because of that, that's fair. I'm not a neutral party to this. I don't think there is a neutral party that cares about this topic really. I am on the team that thinks censorship sucks. But just to be clear, I don't think that justifies attacking or harassing anyone on any side of this argument. Also, I was originally going to leave that for later, but just in case you decide to leave right now, I would hate for you to stop watching this video believing that Alex Ahad or Mike Z were bad guys because recent reviews led to the discovery that, as it turns out, there is no evidence either of them did anything immoral or illegal, and that the entire mess with the studio and the recent Mike allegations might have been quite possibly just a fight over money. So yeah, always feels good when that stuff happens, huh? So, to talk about Skullgirls, I don't think we have to dive very deeply into every single change that was made. Instead, I believe I can very easily argue all of my points by just analyzing a dozen or so seconds of the beginning of the story. Yes, I am not joking. We'll see if this theory holds up, but basically, let's sum up the beginning of Philia's story mode. For those who don't know, Philia is arguably the main character of Skullgirls in the same way Ryu is the main character of Street Fighter. Even if they are not necessarily the focus of the world the game takes place in, she is the poster girl for it, so naturally, a player might feel inclined to start with her story first. The beginning of her chapter starts with Philia just trying to enjoy a milkshake, I believe, at a diner, and a man approaches her and gets way too handsy, like damn, he's just straight up groping her. So her magical hair demon, Sansom, kicks the creep's ass so he learns a lesson. And here, we can already see two instances of censorship. The first piece of art is zoomed in, so it's no longer clear where the creep is touching, which like other instances of censorship, ends up making the entire thing ambiguously worse, and the other is a simple quick and done panty shot removal. But there's nothing that bad about this scene, is there? I mean, you could disagree with that statement, but if you do agree but can't quite point your finger on what exactly is simply not that wrong, it might have to do with the fact that you're interpreting this scene using the power of context. That's the word of the day. Context. So very often when people talk about problematic content, they usually do not mention in their conversation the context of the content they are talking about. The world moves fast nowadays and people want to have opinions about everything and they need those opinions quickly, so it's very easy for a developer to say, there was sexual harassment in our game, but it's gone now, and for you to assume, well, sexual harassment is pretty bad, it's good that it's not there anymore, and then you move on with your life. But if you stop for 1 single second to think, this single second can change your life as you think, wait, there was what in your game? How does that work? And therein, dear viewer, lies the problem. Context matters. If no piece of art exists in a vacuum, no single frame or element of it exists without context as well, no? I'm bad at explaining things without examples, so allow me to use one to help elaborate on what I'm talking about. To talk about context, we are going to need to talk about a very old movie. The Birth of a Nation is a silent black and white movie directed by D.W. Griffith and released in 1915. It is well known for being a revolutionary movie that introduced many filmmaking techniques at once that would go on to influence several other movies, with many people calling it the true birth of cinema. It is also well known for being unbelievably fucking racist. I won't go into too much detail here, but it's basically a 3-hour-long epic about the American Civil War that is actually the superhero origin story for the Ku Klux Klan. Yes, really. And it centers around the stories of two families on opposing sides of the American Civil War, and what happens in the post-Reconstruction South after black people are allowed basic human rights, which, just in case you didn't know, were not even properly enforced in real life. In the reality this movie presents though, it allows them to basically do whatever they want. Thematically, this movie is pure garbage, and wasn't even the true introduction to the world of a lot of the techniques its director claims it to be, but for our specific purposes, it is a masterclass in how much context and presentation can change how an audience is intended to perceive a scene. Out of context, I could tell you that right at the beginning of the second half of the movie, the part of the movie that talks about the Reconstruction era South, there is a series of scenes depicting formerly abused black workers quitting their jobs, receiving supplies as charity from the North to build new lives after being freed from enslavement, and black soldiers marching down the street when they stumble across one of the white protagonists. Using just these neutral descriptions that I gave, those scenes could have easily been put together to showcase a new beginning for the black people of the South, as they can finally begin a dignified life after being freed from their former oppressors. But in the context of the film, all of the black characters are depicted as being lazy, easily manipulated, entitled, and inherently hostile towards white people. This all comes to a head at the climax of the movie, in which the KKK rides into town and stops black people from voting, and I know this is going to sound incredibly inflammatory, but bear with me, okay? Even the KKK rides into town and stops black people from voting is a neutral description of events. The movie could have easily shown this ending as a tragedy, as a way to display how, even in a country where black and white people are now technically legally equal, which they were not, by the way, black people couldn't even marry white people, there was a lot of stuff that still needed working out, but they could have shown that black people still suffered even though they are now technically equal, and that they still suffer to this day under terrible injustice. Instead, the movie plays it out as a triumph. The movie itself speaks in a way that it is a good thing that the KKK arrived and did that, and that it is a good thing that they stopped black people from voting. The music is triumphant, the KKK is founded by one of the protagonists, the only black character who reaches the end sympathetically is a black woman who serves one of the protagonist's families, and thus, under the biggest quotation marks possible, knows her place. And the antagonist is a mixed-race man who abuses the power white people have given him and manipulates the black men serving under him for his own evil purposes. That last part, by the way, is spot on. As a man of mixed race myself, I can tell you that I live every single day of my life trying to undermine the white man. It's just my weapon of choice is anime titties. My terrible sense of humor aside, Birth of a Nation is a horrible movie. Every single scene of the Reconstruction era arc has a context that makes it incredibly racist. People were up in arms about how racist it was, even back when it was released. You probably don't need me to tell you how racist it is, because at a single glance you can already see how almost every black character was just a white man using blackface. And when you put together all of the scenes, they create an even bigger meta context around the movie. Yes. I shall call this new hitherto undiscovered meta-context a message, yes. And the message of this movie is black people bad, pretty much.
You black is no とか.
So, what does all of this terrible stuff has to do with Skullgirls? Well, dear viewer, I just armed you with the weapon of knowledge. Now that you know how context works, let's review the first scene of Philia's story in Skullgirls. Yes, Philia is just minding her own business, drinking what I presume to be a delicious milkshake, when a man approaches her to harass her. Sansom kicks his ass, we get to see a panty shot because, well, that's what happens when you fight or intense movement happens around short skirts, and the guy is blown away. Nowhere in the context of this scene are we meant to sympathize with the man who was harassing Philia. Nowhere in this scene are we meant to believe she or Sansom went overboard, and this guy is never mentioned again because he acted like a creep and he got dealt with like a creep should. No more mention of this event is needed. So, as we can see, the context makes it pretty clear that this scene is not pro-sexual harassment in any way, shape or form. It is in fact very anti-harassment. Looking from this perspective, it feels weird that the developer decided to censor the content at all, even if they kept the original context intact. In fact, due to the way it is edited, the scene can now imply the harassment is far worse than it is, something that commonly happens when you try to censor something by just throwing in a censor bar or zooming in the camera. It feels like unnecessary busywork that, at its worst, makes the scene looks worse than it is. Unless it's a single picture or drawing on Twitter or Instagram or whatever kids will be using when they are watching this video in the future, whatever you're looking at has context. And even in those instances, the pictures can have a different context depending on who posted them, where and when. It's why you can see a funny tweet about haha women and note that the guy who posted it is not sexist, because a single glance at the entire rest of that guy's internet history will show that he's actually pretty damn feminist when it comes to actually serious topics. Context, by the way, is how you know what he said was a joke in the first place, and you know when he's talking seriously. Artistic or otherwise, every form of communication has context, dipshit. It came free with your goddamn society. Now, with this simple idea, I'm sure even the people who disagreed with me when they started this video, they all agree with me now. Their eyes have been opened. I am a genius. I discovered the power of context, and censorship is bad, and now we can all move on with the knowledge that we should only censor something when the context is very deliberately and seriously overtly racist or sexist. That's it. Video's over. Do not look at the progress bar. Do not look at the progress bar under the video. Do not look. The Handmaiden is a 2016 movie directed by the one, the only, one of my favorite directors of all time, Park Chan-wook. It is a very good movie, and I will spoil only a little bit of it, but it is better watched completely unspoiled, so if you want to pause the video to go watch it, I won't hold any grudges. Even if you do not come back, it's fine. The movie is just seriously that good. But also it's a very explicit movie, so don't watch it with anybody else nearby. You will thank me for that later. You watched it? You good to go? Okay then. Even if you didn't, I'll try to spoil as little as possible, but we do need to go into the basic plot of the movie. The Handmaiden is, at heart, a con movie. It takes place in Japan-occupied Korea and focuses on a con man who tries to con an old man who betrayed Korea for Japan, so just know he is the worst. He is obsessed with his niece, who he keeps locked up in his half-Western, half-Japanese style manner, and the con man's plan is to seduce and marry said niece, then lock her up in an asylum so he can get the inheritance. In order to pull off his plan though, he employs the help of a bottom-tier con woman who is supposed to act as the rich one's handmaiden, hence the movie name. Unfortunately, or perhaps rather fortunately, the con woman ends up falling in love with the seemingly sheltered rich woman and thus begins a complex relationship where nobody really knows who is fooling who anymore. It's a con movie, so of course there are lots of twists and tricks and turns and interesting things happening, and yet amongst all of that trickery and that treachery, one of the most often discussed points of the movie, at least in all of the Western discussions that I've read, is just how feminist and LGBT plus friendly it is. The main characters, Suki, I'm sorry if I pronounce her name incorrectly, Suki, the con woman, and Hideko, the sheltered niece, they are essentially victims of the machinations of the men in the plot, trying to find a happy ending for themselves while manipulating or avoiding the manipulations of said men, but they don't have a simple relationship either, as they are both essentially trying to manipulate each other as well on behalf of said men or in order to indirectly escape from said men, so it's complicated, alright? It's a very complex movie. The film also features very explicit sex scenes in it, of which I will show none because even if I'm not monetized, I'm not going to let a video with this much effort into it get taken down for any reason. Thank you very much. But given all of the context surrounding them, these scenes are clearly meant to be a good thing. They are about two gay women having a gay old time, and they are the true protagonists of the story, and we are meant to root for them and hope their love at least is genuine among this tangled web of lies. So yes, there is sexual content, but it is very much a good thing that it is there. Or is it? You see, when The Handmaiden was originally released, it was received with what Metacritic describes as universal acclaim. It didn't mean that everybody liked it, but clearly a high enough percentage of people did, and Metacritic does love its dramatic exaggerations, so I'll let it slide. But, more importantly to our discussion, smaller outlets, especially as time went on, had a bone to pick with this movie. You see, some people believed that the movie could actually be read as objectifying their female leads through the power of the male gaze. The film's detractors argued that the spicy scenes were not liberating for women, and lesbians in particular, but actually only meant to titillate its male audience. Which is bullshit because I'm sure the lesbians were very happy with it as well, but that detail aside, I can actually see where they're coming from. It's not that I think the spice needs to be removed from the movie or anything, but the movie goes to great lengths to condemn its male leads when they try to objectify and control these women, only to end in a love scene in which they contort their bodies unnaturally to appeal to the camera in a way so blatant it felt like I somehow had clicked on the wrong tab on my computer. As I said, I don't wish to erase these scenes. I think the fact that they're there and that they're confronting the audience with the fact that yes, lesbians have sex too is great, and every couple, male and female, male and male, and all of the other infinite non-binary pairings all deserve their time on the silver screen. But the context of the movie make these scenes feel off. This isn't a cheesecake comedy, it's a proper period thriller drama trying to make a point about the objectification of women, and somehow we ended up here, objectifying women. The point I'm trying to make is not that this movie is bad or anything like that, or that it should be censored or edited or anything. The point that I'm trying to make here is to once again talk about context. It's that even with context, I personally disagree with this particular way this director tackled this particular issue. And that's fine. There's an entire rest of an amazing movie to enjoy, even if you don't think a particular scene or scenes were handled to your taste. And that is the lesson that I want you to take away from this quick dive into The Handmaiden, that even with good context, there is, and here comes the second word of the day, nuance. And that different people can interpret context differently depending on their personal preferences and life experiences. And so, we return back to Philia's initial scene in her story mode of Skullgirls. Sure, we have enough evidence that the developers did not intend the creepy weirdo, that's his nickname now, he's the creepy weirdo. Well, the developers clearly did not intend for him to be sympathetic, given his sent flying by piercing tentacles and promptly forgotten about. They were clearly interested in introducing Philia in a unique way, not in providing serious commentary on sexual harassment. And this is what I call the first layer, context in a superficial way. Now we can examine the second layer. We can go deeper and examine the nuance in context. Ironically, while we will investigate deeper, in this particular instance I recommend we get further away from the action into the real world and put the audience into the equation. That is us. We are the audience. And while in-world there is a context, in the real world there is another context to talk about as well, which is the context of framing, the window we use to dive into fictional worlds. And it is here that you can start to see some problems. Firstly, Philia could have been harassed in lots of different ways. The specific way she is harassed is used to indicate, look, there's no good way to say it. I know that people are going to take this out of context, but I have to say it, so I'll just get out of it, okay? She is grabbed in a way that could be interpreted to emphasize how soft and plump she is. And then when Sansom fights back, the panty shot is natural from this angle, but the artist could have potentially showed this from a different angle which would hide the panty shot and does not sexualize her. Thus, if you follow this theory, the angles and actions were specifically chosen to appeal to the male gaze. Now, in universe and out of universe, this fictional guy is a creep, but out of universe, can we enjoy sexualizing her without feeling like creeps because of this degree of separation? Are we the same as the character or are we not? Is this hypercritical? So, does that make the censorship justified? In this instance, I have to disagree with all of that. Just like how I wouldn't like the explicit scenes from The Handmaiden to be cut from the movie, I feel like censoring this scene at the beginning of Philia's story would actually detract from the scene. If we don't see the actual extent of the harassment, we could easily interpret Philia as overreacting. Sure, the censorship this time lucked out and made it look worse than it is, but it could have easily made it look better than it was. And thus we run into the old BioShock Infinite problem, where they want to showcase how horribly racist the old US of A was, but they keep pulling punches because they don't want to offend anybody, resulting in people going, why is everybody being this violent and rebellious? It's a bad situation, yes, but it doesn't look that bad. This kind of disconnect between some of the audience of BioShock Infinite and what the developer intended for them to feel happens. As always, not to everyone in the audience, but some people feel that, and they feel that way because the game did not show them how bad things actually could get. They did not show them the villain doing the actual bad things and how bad those things are in a way that justified the response the villain got. Skullgirls shows how far the guy went, and thus, when Sansom almost kills him, we actually wish it was worse. We actually wish he threw the dipshit out of a window. As for the panty shot, I actually think it was a good choice because this particular angle gives a very good look at Sansom and allows us to instantly understand what he is in a way that, say, a front side angle from the perspective of the bar or top down angle wouldn't allow. And this is just a pet peeve of mine, a personal pet peeve, but I just hate magical skirt. Clothes should behave like clothes. If your skirt is shot, you should panty shot during action scenes. If you don't want to show panties, pull off a pinsaka. Use shorts for your characters. Now, assume that there is a fictional person that made all of those first arguments, and I'm talking to them. They might respond to me by pointing out that, well, maybe Philia's skirt doesn't have to be so short. Maybe it could be longer to prevent panty shots from happening in the first place, and it would make the harassment less appealing to creepy audience members since they could just hide the grab spots over clothing. And my answer would probably be something along the lines of thinking it seems a bit excessive to change an entire character design for one scene, and the other person would say that preventing panty shots from every scene would be a win, and I would say that if that extended to the entire cast, that would require a complete redesign of the entire cast. Do you want to prevent panty shots from the entire cast? And they would say that wouldn't it be good to prevent these problems from happening ever again across the story modes? And I would say that actually that's kind of sexist to try and prevent every female character from using sexy clothing or whatever they want really just to prevent panty shots. Doesn't that kind of go against the whole that we think that women can wear whatever they want? And they would respond that if the skirt isn't longer, they would go back to the point that the scene has to go, because it's okay for women to be sexy when they're empowered, but it's not okay when they're victims. And I would respond that technically they will all still be wearing sexy clothes when they're victims because this is a fighting game. Somebody somebody has to be pummeled into the ground unconsciously, and some people will interpret that state as sexually appealing. Somebody has to be the victim of violence at all times. This is just the nature of the genre. And we would go back and forth like this for hours, and we would have to order pizza and drinks and continue until the wee hours of the morning, at which point, if we ever reached an understanding, it would basically be a completely different game from Skullgirls. As you can probably tell, I actually spent a lot of time discussing with myself the pros and cons of censorship in order to make this video. I didn't just said, I'm anti-censorship and made this video. I actually wanted to consider all sorts of different points of view that I've heard about before, and you probably also inferred that I have no friends. But hey, pop quiz. Which of our theories is the correct one? Me or the imaginary pro-censorship person? Which of us would win in this argument, do you think? No hurry. I'll let you think for a little bit. This might also be a good time to take a break if you've been watching this non-stop. No hurry, just take a breather, think about it, pause the video, come back later when you have an answer if you want to digest everything that I just told you, okay? No hurry. Okay, you ready? The answer is, it's a trick question. Both of us are technically correct. None of us can objectively prove that the other side is wrong. Both of us brings up valid points, and that's what's so bullshit about nuance and subjectivity. No one can be objectively correct because we can approach the same scene from infinitely different angles and incredibly different systems of value. Now multiply that infinity by the number of people who actually care about this, and I'm not good at math, but I think you're screwed. Yep, the numbers say you're screwed. That's because there are so many people, just so many voices, that you can't possibly please everyone. Nuance means that some people will be okay with all of this, some people will be okay with the harassment but not the panty shot, some people will be okay with the panty shot but not the harassment, and some people will want both cut, and other people will have completely different ideas entirely of how this should work. It's impossible for a single work of art that exists objectively in the world to listen to and to appeal to all of the subjective tastes that exists in the world. Someone once said that the definition of insanity is trying the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. But I came up with a new one just now. The definition of an insane artist is trying to create a piece of art that appeals to everyone while offending no one. Not that this definition will stop Disney from trying. Going back to the critics of The Handmaiden, as much as I hate aggregate sites like Metacritic and Rotten Tomatoes, you have to remember that it was also widely praised in general when it came out. If I said to you that everybody praised it except for the things that I pointed out as potentially problematic, if I said, oh, they loved it, but they saw that part as problematic and they pointed it out, that would be a lie. A lot of people loved the movie 100%, saw no problem in the scenes that I told you about, and they saw it as empowering and honestly just a good fun thriller with lots of twists that had a deep sense of empathy for its gay main characters, and they felt that the silver screen needed more of that. In other words, different people tackled it from different angles and gave different weight to different aspects depending on their own personal preferences rather than any weird objective measure. But reading through all those reviews, if there is one thing that I found very comfortable about all of them, which is a weird adjective to use here, but really I found comfortable, it's how none of them asked for censorship. They believed that the director meant no harm, and the harshest critics were, at most, disappointed in how the movie wasn't as progressive as they hoped it would be, or went into some problematic territory, but not a single one asked for the movie to be removed from circulation or believe it needed censorship. The call for censorship is not a phenomenon particular to gaming, but I feel like, as the youngest art form in the world, it is particularly strong here because the gaming industry never tried to quote-unquote clean itself up with something like the Hays Code or the Comics Code. Though, of course, pressure to cut any controversial content if you want to control your rating to reach a wide audience is something common across all art forms. But that's a symptom of executive boards trying to turn all art into the samey grey sludge in order to maximize profits rather than being born out of any moral concerns. But gaming never had to deal with a strict guideline saying if a character can be allowed to smoke or not, if same-sex relationships are allowed or not. We had for a very short period of time the Nintendo Seal of Quality, a somewhat analogous system in which, just like the Hays Code, it was enforced by the industry instead of a governmental body, but it was not really the industry so much as one company, and again, it wasn't mainly about moral concerns so much as sales. It did serve as a warning about the dangers of monopolization and having just one central console to play games in at any given time, but gamers don't really know what it's actually like to live under that. I don't know about that myself, having been born too late to experience that era, but the scars left across Hollywood remain. I doubt any creator or movie critic now, or into the future, will ever call for another censorship authority to ever be created to control things out of a moral concern. Not without a gun to their heads from a future cyberpunk-esque authoritarian government anyway. And so, possibly because of that, possibly because of reasons that I just do not understand, video games seem to be ripe for people wanting cuts to be made. From people who can't handle a little sex appeal without wanting the creator to bend over backwards to justify every single instance of it in a video game, to people crying over pronouns being an option at character creation, which, by the way, there are actual mods to remove those. There are mods that remove the pronouns in Starfield, when you could have just simply ignored the option entirely. You could just have not changed or touched that. You're literally putting in extra effort to remove content from your game, you dumb morons! But back on topic. They rarely, if ever, ask for a central censorship authority to be created, but instead they want these cuts mainly to be done according to mob rule, basically, which, let's be real, doesn't sound much better, because it isn't much better. But it does leave us in a curious situation in which a surprising amount of people, not everyone, not usually even the majority, but still a surprising amount of people from all across the political spectrum that literally cannot tolerate a single artistic choice that differs from their personal values in the art they consume. Even if the art were to portray the actions as bad, or have them done by a villain to just really hammer the point home that it is a bad thing, they just won't stand it. When it comes to pronouns in mainstream games like Starfield, that means basically nothing. It's a AAA Bethesda game published by Microsoft. No matter who cries on the internet, that game was going to sell gangbusters. But for niche games like Skullgirls, those cries can mean everything. So, what is the lesson that I want you to take away from this segment of the video? It's that gamers don't deserve human rights, but also that if you're going to do art, don't run back your plans at the first sight of trouble just because some people got offended, because it's literally impossible to please everyone, and talking about what should and should not be censored will devolve inevitably into endless arguments about how and what to censor. And no matter which point you arrive at, no matter where you draw the line on what you should censor, everybody will be pissed off. Everybody but the people who asked for that specific level of censorship will be absolutely livid, and they will be correct, because it would have been so much better if you just left things as they were and let people unpack their emotions personally, individually. Just throw it out there and let people unpack their own feelings. If anything, this entire incident also exposes how utterly screwed up the distribution of digital content is in the current era of video games, where developers can just upload a new patch and completely change the game you love and leave you in the dust with no refund. The second worst time to censor a game is after you already reviewed it, but the absolutely worst time is when the game has been out for more than a decade. But I do want to emphasize that this is not to say that you should never discuss problematic media or what you find to be problematic in media, but you do need a degree of self-awareness to realize that you will always be biased and never objectively correct about it, and to understand that while the artists might take your advice and try to take that into account the next time, they might also respectfully decline it as it clashes too much with what they actually want to do, and they could continue to produce the art that they want because it was never meant to appeal to you, and that's fine. My point is that asking for censorship is futile and can easily lead into very unpleasant rabbit holes. Just live a normal life, go home, be a family man, criticize media and accept that your favorite art might contain content that you do not enjoy or find questionable. Live and let die. But don't think that this is over yet, because I got a third layer that I want to talk to you about today. Yes, that's right, we haven't reached the core yet. There is one more aspect of Skullgirls that I want to talk about. If you sensed what is coming next, if you think you know what I'm going to talk about, you might have thought that I was too cowardly to bring this up, but no. Tonight is fight night. We go big or we go home. It's finally time to address an even deeper layer of context, one that I think will prove, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that it was just pointless to censor this game. And in order to elaborate on this point, that goes beyond the scene and even beyond the framing that we have been discussing so far, we have to dive into the wiki pages and the encyclopedias of the game. Wiki pages, design bibles, and interviews are all a bit of a giant mess when it comes to media analysis, because they can add a lot of context that people have different opinions about if they should count or not. After all, if something is not in the original work, how can you expect the casual viewer to dive deep into secondary encyclopedias just to understand the true meaning of the events that they watched? Lore and world building and interesting trivia is fine, but hiding actual plot critical information inside of an encyclopedia, even an in-game encyclopedia, is some next level nonsense. And I'm looking at you, Bayonetta 3, you specifically. Why did you do that? Nonetheless, we must dive into these places because fighting games, especially ones that only have arcade-like story modes, are notorious for putting plot critical information in manuals and other places. So today, mainly, I don't want to dive into any plot critical information, instead I want to zero in on a very specific little bit of additional information. Because you see, if you're one of the people who think the wiki really matters, there is one additional fact that we must take into account when talking about philia. According to the wiki, philia is actually 16 years old. Now, there's a lot of discussion going on about sexualization in media and the age of fictional characters these days, many of which never really get to their logical conclusions. Most just linger on the infinite abyss of the internet, most of them cases in which people just refuse to actually discuss anything and just resort to name-calling and insanely bad faith arguments. That's just, I think at this point, 90% of the internet is just people talking past each other. It's gotta be. But once something bubbles up to the surface though, it's usually a gotcha moment that goes something like, a person says that you shouldn't do anything risky with those characters, that's weird, but then they are proven to be hypocrites when they are caught in 4K sexualizing other media in which the characters might be underage or might be ambiguously underage, or in the worst case scenario they are actual criminals, they're just actual criminals. So everybody points at them and points out their hypocrisy and they laugh and then they move on. Rightfully so, because there's nothing to be gained here, but it's still just a little bit of a pebble in my shoe, I think that's what people call it. It always makes me a little bit bothered that nobody stays for the after party of these events and gets to the heart of the issue and they just spell it out. They usually just move on after dunking on people because dissecting what is actually happening here can be a bit uncomfortable. It's also because of the stigma that these kinds of topics attract and people have already picked their sides and all they want to do is dunk on the other side and not talk about it. So if you try to seriously discuss this topic and unpack what is happening here, whatever you end up saying, regardless of how you say, is simply not going to be a good look. But I still think finding what you personally believe in is not about hanging on to a good look, it's about being honest with yourself even when it hurts and it is uncomfortable. And since this video is basically already one long therapy session for me, get ready for the most dogshit take of the century. None of that, guys, I think racism is bad, please clap bullshit, but an opinion that could actually be slightly controversial. So here it goes. I don't care about the ages of fictional characters. The actual number that are on the wiki pages, half of the time they feel like a dice roll, and I just can't muster the energy to think any of that matters at all. Buttons is a 2023 teen comedy movie directed by Emma Seligman and written by Emma Seligman and Rachel Sennott, about two lesbian teenagers who want to date cheerleaders. Unfortunately, they are mostly seen by the entire school as ugly, untalented gays, and thus they can't just approach and ask their love interests out, so they hatch a crazy scheme of making a girls' fight club in order to get closer to their crushes. There is no deep historical context here, or any crazy, good, weird filmmaking. This is just a really funny comedy that I really enjoyed. Also, Ayo Edebiri's character constantly making up depressing scenarios in her head is just literally me. It's great. It's not in spite of this being a low-stakes comedy movie that I mention it though, it is because of it. Because while humor is incredibly subjective, Buttons is hilarious to me. The idea of mixing a rom-com with a Fight Club subplot and involving actual blood and fighting, it just appealed to me. I like weird mixes, and I wanted to check it out. And while it is definitely not perfect and not every joke lands, because really, what comedy has every single joke land? I still really enjoyed it, and honestly, this movie might just have been the final spark that I needed to make this video. While this video idea has been simmering in my head for months ever since the censorship patch hit, with me wondering if I should or shouldn't make this video, if I had any authority or research, if it was a good idea, what did I actually understand about censorship? It got me thinking, but it wasn't until I watched the Buttons and had a good time and saw everybody else having a good time that something clicked in my brain and I realized, hey, wait a second. These characters are all meant to be high schoolers, and they did some really screwed up things in this movie, so why is nobody complaining about that? Why did I have a good time? Why is everybody having a good time? Is it okay to have a good time now? Like, one of the centerpiece jokes of the movie is that at one point the cheerleaders are going to do a pep rally, so you expect them to start jumping and moving around like a normal cheerleader routine, you know, I don't know what it's called, is it a cheerleader dance? You expect them to do that, right? But instead, they just dump water on top of one of them while she jumps to make her breasts bounce. And that's it. That's the routine. And it is hilarious. The first act antagonist, a dumb quarterback that's the star of the school's football team, who is the boyfriend of one of the love interests, he is even in an explicitly sexual relationship with one of the character's much older mom. I do not have the time here to list all the ways that relationship would be deeply wrong if it was happening in real life. Also, they have drawings of him only wearing boxers plastered in posters across the entire school because, yeah, that's just how they roll. He doesn't even get properly punished for cheating on his girlfriend or being a bully though, because he doesn't really play the paper of a traditional villain. He is ultimately played as a dumb silly idiot who is incapable of doing actual harm, especially compared to the final act villains, the football team from the opposing school, who are essentially planning to murder him on the field during the most important game of the year. Did I mention the school's library is closed off because they shut up the library as well? It's crazy, but that's really the trick that makes everything works. Buttons is too ridiculous and far-fetched for you to take it seriously on any level. It doesn't operate in our level of reality, it operates on a completely different comedic dimension. Now, I know what you might be thinking, dear viewer. Isn't there the possibility that they are just using the tropes of outdated teen comedies of the 2000s in order to comment and parody on the tropes of the movies of that era? And in which case, I have to answer that parodying or lampshading a trope does not require you to play out the same trope. It is in fact preferable that you do not, or you might look like a fool if you try to say the thing you're parodying is bad while you're doing the exact same thing. Thankfully, Buttons play a lot of it straight, get it straight, to a new lens because it is not a condemnation of those movies, but a gender-flipped gay take on those movies. Seligman even said in an interview with the Los Angeles Times, and I shall quote her here, "Looking back, I would have loved to have seen more queer female characters. But I also would have loved to have seen girls beating each other up and fighting to save the day. And I love movies like Scott Pilgrim and Kick-Ass and Attack the Block. Movies where a bunch of boys are getting together to be rambunctious, rambunctious, right? And fight and do stuff. And so, this was a culmination of a lot of different kinds of movies, with young teen female characters I wish I could have seen. So, as far as I understand it, and let me be frank, I understand very little, Buttons is not laughing at those movies, it is laughing with them, and that's what makes all of the difference. There is an alternative universe out there where we didn't get wet cheerleader breasts on the center of the frame. Those are not necessary for the plot to move forward, and it isn't about the characters interacting with each other, so you can't even say, Well, the characters are teenagers, and teenagers being attracted to other teenagers is not problematic. You can't say that, because the scene plays out 100% for the benefit of the audience, whatever age that audience might be. But I think removing that scene would have made for a slightly lesser movie. Bottoms is, after all, a horny, awkward, funny, and very rambunctious, God, couldn't I have picked an easier word to say? Well, it is authentically all of that, and you're not meant to think these are real teenagers who look like real teenagers, acting like real teenagers would. All of the actors and actresses are much older, of course, but it is a larger-than-life parody of these concepts, getting played around by being taken to a ridiculous extreme. It plays around with the mythology, shall we say, of the American high school for laughs and to instantly get you into the headspace of the characters, because according to myth, cheerleaders and jocks are hot, but they're also at the top of the social pyramid, so you can instantly understand why our main characters want to date some of them, while also getting how unlikely that is since they are at the bottom of the social pyramid. But it is all, of course, a farce. Real life does not work one-to-one to that, nor is it ever that simple or ridiculous. At least, I hope you Americans haven't reached the point where you are shooting up rival schools because of football. Please tell me you are not actually doing that. And the funniest thing, perhaps, about this whole affair, in a meta way, outside of the movie, is that everybody seems to be in on the joke. I have seen plenty of criticism of this movie. Many of them are about the jokes. They are saying the jokes aren't funny, which is very fair. It is a very silly comedy. I did not expect it to be this over the top when I started, so it might not be your style. If that is not your style, you probably won't enjoy it very much, and that's a fair criticism. But not a single article talks about it being problematic in any way, shape, or form. Actually, that's a lie. I did find one review from Polygon which called it problematic. But I don't respect Polygon. Most people who are going to watch Bottoms are going to be reasonable people, and reasonable people understand that they are watching a product of fiction for the sake of having a fun time, and that not every concept is going to match one-to-one to reality, nor is the movie endorsing that girls actually go out there and start fight clubs. So why does this concept seem often lost when discussing more niche media like Skullgirls? In order to discuss that, yep, you guessed it, we're going back to the same 30 seconds or so of footage from the start of Philia's story mode. Don't worry about it, this is the last time we're going back to it, I swear. So if the first layer was about the superficial context of a scene and the second about the audience participation in the nuance and understanding of a scene, the third layer of fiction analysis is about understanding the goals of the artist when he makes art. In other words, it's about intention and execution. It is by far the most challenging of layers, as it is pretty much an impossible task. It is impossible to figure out what an artist was thinking when he made a piece of art. But by analyzing any piece of media, we can sort of guess what they were going for. The vibes, so to speak. That's why when a movie is a comedy and there's suddenly an incredibly sad scene on it, we get mood whiplash. We know things are not quite right because we do sort of pick up on the hints of what the artist was going for. And the more media we consume, the easier it is to pick on the subtle hints that things are not quite right. Tone is a powerful weapon. An inconsistent tone does not necessarily mean that the author has failed, it might mean that he's trying to create a work that aims to invoke more than one specific tone or clash tones on purpose as a statement, and your personal opinion will decide if that's something you enjoy or not, but I went off on a tangent. Again, we can discuss tone in art another day. Instead, what I want you to focus on is figuring out Skullgirls' tone. It is a dark, Art Deco style, stylized cartoon 1920s Americana with anime-inspired character designs kind of vibe. It is a world of moral grace, where a lot of characters, including a surprising amount of playable ones, do a lot of nasty, downright evil stuff sometimes. But all of that works on a very superficial rule of cool way. Things in the Skullgirls universe do not work according to the logic of the era that inspired the scenery, nor does it work according to anything resembling reality. There is no way these women would get away with wearing most of their outfits if this was actually based on a realistic portrayal of the USA in the 1920s. Whatever shows up on screen is not there to be authentic. It is there because it looks cool or because it looks sexy. Or in Peacock's case, because it's funny. If we move forward just a little bit, away from the hellish purgatory that is the first few moments of Philia's story at this point, we quickly get a little more context on the scene. You see, Philia didn't attack the guy who harassed her, Sansom, her magical hair demon parasite friend, did that by himself. She bemoans him, saying she could have handled it and that they need to keep a low profile, but Sansom is too protective of her to allow that. And it is within those few lines of dialogue that we can finally come to understand what the actual point of the scene is from a functional level. It is a quick way to introduce us to these characters and their personalities. Philia as an amnesiac-spirited young woman who stop at nothing to recover her memories, and Sansom as her overprotective supernatural guardian. Skullgirls, like every other piece of artwork, unfortunately did not have unlimited budget or development time, and players probably don't want to wait a lot before punching either, so they gave a sequence that hyper-condensed all of the facts that we needed to know in a short amount of time before sending us off into the rest of the story mode. We were never meant to read this much into this scene. It was never meant to be a statement about sexual harassment bad or sexual harassment good. The writer probably just assumed that the audience would be smart enough to know that it is bad, and thus that anyone who commits it is valid fodder to showcase the powers of the character. If only they knew what the internet would become. As for the panty shot, I haven't forgotten about that. While it is true that this is the natural way her skirt would move given Sansom is going crazy with his tentacles, the real reason for it, beyond all of that we already discussed, is that it's probably just cheesecake, okay? It's just fan service of the sexy variety. Like I mentioned, Skullgirls operates on the logic of trying to show something cool or something sexy as often as possible, so let's throw in a panty shot here, why not? And yes, I am aware that some people might take this why not to mean, well, if it's just a why not decision, then why not remove the panty shot, why not show it, but that's not what I meant and you know it. Everybody knows why it is like that. It's because sexiness and cheesecake is one of the main selling points of Skullgirls. People paid to see this. People paid, so whenever something cool wasn't happening, something sexy would be happening, okay? That's a bit reductive. I think people would still enjoy it if it was something emotional or cute instead, but let's not deny that this game taking place in a world with traditionally seductive character designs wasn't one of its main draws, in which case censoring it actively removes one of the main reasons people bought it in the first place. It lowers the value of the game, even if it does not change the central themes and messages of the game. By the way, at this point in the video, where we have already discussed context and characters and actions and all of that stuff, you might be wondering just, well, what the central theme of Skullgirls is. We talked about messages and theme, right? So what is the central theme of Skullgirls? Well, it is a bit hard to discern. I don't think this game was built to tell a proper central message in the traditional way we're used to, like a moral message and Aesop, but if I had to guess from my personal point of view, I'd say the theme of the game is sacrifice. The story centers around a cursed artifact called the Skull Heart, which will grant a wish to any woman who obtains it. The wish is always granted, normally no twists, but in return the woman is corrupted into becoming the next Skullgirl, a being of incredible destruction that sets out to try and destroy the world. So, as you can see, unlike the usual genie in a lamp story, the wish is granted fairly, and getting your greatest desire is about how much you're willing to personally sacrifice. Except that actually 90% of the endings, the Skull Heart is just destroyed, so it is really just more of an excuse, like a MacGuffin that everybody would watch you fight over, than a proper plot device. So honestly, I don't know. I think the developers just simply did not care going over the fine print, these small details like we are going over right now, because on the grand scheme of things, these things that we are going over again and again and again, these details, they just do not matter. And I know the staff thought that these details didn't matter either, because shortly after the release of the game, a few months later after the release of the game, in August of 2012, infamous Internet Rule 34 artist Zone posted an adult animation of Philia. featuring one of the voice actors that worked in the game itself. No, it wasn't Philia's actress, it was the announcer. And after that, they still got hired to work on the game for a period of time as well. So nobody in the team saw any issue with that at all. And don't hit me with, oh, those were different times, Peel, it was 2012. I'm pretty sure if you think this counts as minor abuse, abusing minors wasn't exactly in vogue back then either. And you know nobody really cares except when it was time to defend the censorship because they had been playing the game and posting gameplay for a decade before any of this happened. And if any of that constituted real abuse, if any of them thought that this was an actual character that actually represented their age that they were doing this stuff with, a lot of people are going to jail right now. To make this entire affair even more pointless, her age doesn't factor into her story at all. She doesn't hang around the high school except for one drawing at the end of her story mode. She does not talk about high school stuff. She does not talk about her friends or anything that would identify her age or use any slang. She basically acts no different than if she was a 20-year-old or even a 30-year-old amnesiac. So we're not even dealing with a case as possibly controversial, but not really, as Bottoms. And due to the stylization of Skullgirls, her body shape is also not all that different from the rest of the cast. She's not noticeably shorter or taller than any of the other characters. It would honestly make no difference if she was 18 or 21 or whatever the age you think it's appropriate to start sexualizing characters at, but please don't come at me with, if her age doesn't matter, why don't just age her up? They don't have to because the age doesn't matter. And this video is long enough, so I can't afford to argue in circles right now, okay? The random number that writers can pull out of a hat to measure the age of a fictional character does not matter so much as how they look, how they fit in compared to the rest of the cast, how do they act, what is their place in the story, context, etc. What we have been discussing so far. I will never let anyone forget that DZ is canonically 8 years old. Kai Kiski married and had a child with an 8-year-old woman. And actually that's her most recently updated age on the wiki. I'm not going to double check Guilty Gear lore right now because, oh god. But he probably married her when she was younger! So, with all of those points cleared, am I just saying for you to throw everything we talked about before this point on the floor and just forget about it because it was all meaningless? No, of course not. We talked a lot about how I perceive media and I told you my perspective, so you can maybe use that to think about deeper media critically. Or you can use that to criticize my viewpoint to pieces if you disagree with me. I gave you plenty of ammunition, so go ahead. But for Skullgirls specifically, and for a lot of media that plays off on how sexy or cool something is, yeah, that's pretty much useless. It just ain't that deep, bro. That's the thing with video essays and the current modern era of media analysis. We have been taught so much about how to look deeper and find meaning into everything that we forget that sometimes there's just nothing there. There's always something that you can personally interpret, or an element that you can fixate on due to personal preference, even if it's minuscule in the larger context of the story. A lot of media articles that I enjoyed are about what the writers bring to the table with their own personal experiences with the piece of art that they're talking about, but in those instances, I think everybody knows that's not what the artist brought to the table. It's about what you brought to the table. Sometimes you just have to look a critic or a confused person in the eye and say, in the words of the great Andrew Lloyd Webber,
Al, it's about cats.
And this is not a turn your brain off and enjoy the show moment either. I firmly disagree that our brains, once they learn to recognize the patterns, can ever be turned off once again. But this is not a bad thing, because it is by turning your brain on that you can recognize when a piece of media is trying to tell you a deeper message and when it is not. It allows you to separate the chaff from the wet and understand what is the message that the creator is trying to bring to the table and what are merely the tools they are using to arrive at that message. As well as if those tools might unintentionally dilute the message, but it is important to realize what is important and what is merely cool, what is merely the entertainment glue between the points the creator are trying to make. And If they aren't trying to make any points, that's fine too. If they were just trying to scare you, or make you laugh, or make you cry without a deeper purpose, that's fine. That's the fun of art. You can dive into deeply political art when you want to, engage with something deeper, and then you can just relax your brain when you are feeling overwhelmed. Art can be many things. It's great. And yes, I know, our art is political, everything is political, our art is at the very least influenced by politics, but if you think Skullgirls has the same level of political depth as, say, the similarly 1920s inspired Bioshock, I think that says more about you than what the creators put on the table, buddy. Those ingredients, that lot of ingredients that you brought into this kitchen, those are your ingredients. You know what I'm saying? Because I don't. All of this is not even some super arcane knowledge that you need to learn in order to enjoy art or anything like that. Hell, most of you are fine adults, perfectly capable of doing that instinctively. It's just, I kinda showed you how to do that manually. Like blinking manually, you know? You are blinking manually now, by the way. And I understand that a common counterpoint to this is that even if the writers meant nothing by it, they still need to be careful with every single little element that they choose to portray, just in case it offends someone. And my answer to that is, I don't think they have to, honestly. Like I mentioned before, you can approach any of the many points and scenes of a piece of art from infinite angles. It is impossible that someone won't be pissed off or offended by any of them, and I feel like people get especially prickly when it comes to sexual content. While people questioning violent content do exist, 99% of the time, violent content will not come close to the scrutiny that sexual content does. Violence can just exist as a funny gag in a dark comedy, or a mood setter in an action movie or a thriller, but let me remind you that in real life, violence is as serious of an issue as any other. Many people have suffered from being mugged or stabbed and survived with trauma from it, which is why I advocate for trigger warnings no matter how much people might think that is pussy shit, because I genuinely do not want people to engage with traumatic content before they are ready for it. But at the same time, I do not advocate for the complete removal of violence from media just because of that. I know this previous statement might have felt like a complete non sequitur, so let me just clarify. I think media should be allowed to portray things that are nasty in real life if it wants to, and to employ those for a variety of different purposes, and I think people should be properly warned of what's in there to avoid it if they want to, but they should not have the option to alter the original artwork just because of their own personal offense or trauma. Unfortunately, I'm also aware that we can't just ignore something as harmless just because it is purposefully absurd, because actual racists and bigots can use comedy and absurdism to peddle their racist propaganda, but thankfully in our modern age you can usually distinguish those pretty easily because the jokes they tell are garbage, rely on punching down using ridiculous stereotypes, and are just unfunny to anyone who isn't a racist. See the Babylon Bee. If you never heard about them before, I'm so sorry that I was your introduction to them. This is not even a joke, their comedy is just so transparent in their intent and unfunny that the jokes don't even feel like real humans wrote them. But getting closer to our original topic, what all of this means. What does it mean? Does it mean that through the use of the rule of cool that artists can get to put whatever they want into works? As you can imagine, that weirdly sounds like absolving artists from our responsibility, which must be wrong, right? Indeed, all one needs to do is take a look at extreme examples like Birth of a Nation or other propaganda films like Triumph of the Will to quickly see how some shit is just not okay. Not only do these movies advocate for real-life political movements that call for the genocide of people based on race and ethnicity, but there is at least one more point tying them together that makes them pervasively nasty. Now, I'm not a clever man, I think I've already proven this today, but I think that at least one point that can tie all of them together is their blatant lie that everything that they show is the objective truth. That you are not witnessing a heightened reality, but the true reality of the world as it works. It may be dramatized, but they want to sell you the drama as 100% real and that they are as reliable of a source of information as an actual true documentary, when in reality they are twisting historical events to sell to you what is most convenient for them. This is called historical revisionism. Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2019 is a video game. Oh wow, we are finally going to use a video game as an example, okay. It is a reboot of the Modern Warfare arc of the Call of Duty series. It is a first-person shooter developed by Infinity Ward and published by Activision that tells the story of a group of elite international soldiers tracking down terrorists across the globe in order to stop World War III. I don't remember most of the plot really, only that it had a really tense chapter where you played as a child in a combat zone and you could make a whole really effective game out of that. I mean, we already got this War of Mine and stuff, but imagine a full AAA game about civilians trying to survive a war like that. Anyway, that doesn't really matter, because I want to zero in on a very specific moment in the campaign. If you're familiar with this topic, then you already probably guessed what I'm talking about. I'm going to talk about the mission called Highway of Death that takes place in, you guessed it, the Highway of Death. A mostly forgotten piece of highway that was bombed by the Russians, killing thousands of civilians in the fictional country of Uzbekistan. Except, in real life, the Highway of Death really does exist. It is in Iraq, and it was bombed during the Gulf War by the United States and the Canadian and the British and the French as well. No need to be shy. Everybody can get their credit for their part on this massacre. Now, I had heard about this incident before I played the game, but I didn't have quite a complete recollection of what happened. So it was a bit of a pleasant surprise when the gears finally clicked after I played through the campaign and found articles accusing the game of historical revisionism, at which point I decided to fully dive into the history behind the incident and find out that essentially, look, I don't know the best language to say this on, I don't have the correct military language delicacy, but they essentially shifted the blame from a US-led attack to a Russian attack. But of course they didn't just do that, they also tried to employ a few tricks so that this change is not so straightforward, so that they can get away with it. The main one being that Uzbekistan is a fictional country, so technically speaking it is not the same Highway of Death, it is a fictional Highway of Death, and that's just a fictional cool name, right? The Highway of Death, that is the second trick, pointed out by creative director Taylor Kurosaki during an interview he gave to GameSpot. When questioned about his use of this historical event, he said, and I quote, "I think you could probably find many instances of the words Highway of Death being used in a lot of cases." I wonder what Highway of Death he was referring to. Was it the BR-116, a Brazilian highway known for its high number of traffic accidents due to poor weather? Or was it the Mexican Highway of Death that was dubbed so for its high number of disappearances? Oh wait, the Mexican one was only dubbed so in 2021, 2 years after the release of the game, so it couldn't be that one. Yeah, let's just stop screwing around, okay? There is only one big Highway of Death that was bombed by overwhelming military forces in the Middle East and left its mark on history. Call of Duty writers need to stop being cowards. What makes this entire affair so much of a farce as to be hilarious though, is that they didn't even bother to get a fictional country to do the bombing of their fictional highway. Uzbekistan is fictional, but it is bombed and invaded by the very real-life Russia. This is not even a strange real situation like with Ace Combat, where this takes place on an entirely fictional alternate universe. This is a real country invading a fictional country, and they just decided to call it the Highway of Death as well, instead of literally anything else. I'm not even sure what the point of including this event was. I don't know what would be funnier, that the US government went and pressured Activision to include their totally cool fanfiction in which Russia is always the bad guy and the US did nothing wrong in this very specific event, but just for this alternative universe? Or that the developers wanted to include a totally radical historical event, bro, in their game, but they didn't want to step on the toes of the US military. This Call of Duty example is also specifically very useful for our discussion because it showcases you don't need to go to extreme lengths to do some creative interpretation of real-life events. It is a real-life event with the serial numbers filed off, but it's still blatantly referencing a real-life event nonetheless. When you start delving this close into real-life parallels, especially when you misrepresent what actually happened using real-world countries, you can see how this can quickly get out of hand, right? And I know what you might be thinking, man, if this party pooper is this mad about a single mission in a Call of Duty game, imagine if you've heard of biopics. Yeah, I heard of biopics. I have a bone to pick with biopics. Like, how come do they just get to straight up lie about people's lives for the sake of drama and we totally forgive them for that? That's bullshit, man. Why do we let horror movies say stuff like based on true events to try and make things scarier when it's clear that they didn't find no goddamn ghosts in real life? On one hand, it's good that they have to resort to this kind of thing because it showcases definitive proof that people can naturally differentiate fiction from reality and that they put more stock in things people say it's true, they get more invested into that, but it's still kind of bullshit that Hollywood can just get away with that. There is a caveat to this entire affair though, in the form of the often well-regarded literary genre of historical fiction. Basically, fictional stories usually following fictional characters that take place in the context of real-world eras and events. Even though those stories are fictional, they usually portray significant real-life events or people, and there's nothing really wrong with that. One of my favorite stories of all time, the anime and manga Vinland Saga, could be classified as historical fiction. But there is an element of time at play here as well. The Vikings are simply not a faction that has any sway or place in the current modern politics, and the events portrayed are so far into the past, it's almost like the author has a little more room to interpret them, because who is going to be offended or targeted when they have all been dead for centuries? Of course, like every single other part of history, old history is still especially ripe for historical revisionism, and we must watch out for metaphors. If a story is trying to sell you that one of the real-life historical factions is in fact just like a modern faction and that you should admire or abhor them because of it, congratulations! You've successfully identified that you are being sold propaganda. Just look how many people try to compare the history of the Holy Roman Empire to the modern US to try to sell like it is either a wonderful empire or that it is crumbling apart. Also, don't forget about books like Animal Farm. On the surface level, it is a story about animals on a farm, but I think it's not even a spoiler anymore, it's actually a clever metaphor for communism. Technically, you could interpret it as anti-communist propaganda, and that you don't care about propaganda when it fits your political beliefs, but that is outside of the scope of this video, man. The way people under a political system interpret propaganda from that political system, man, I'm just here to tell you that I'm a dumb guy, okay? I don't hold all the answers, and I'd rather admit that than say something stupid that makes everything worse. I don't have the golden rule that allows you to easily identify every piece of propaganda or when you're being sold propaganda within another piece of entertainment, okay? But I just think that games like Skullgirls and other games and other media that have sex appeal probably aren't propaganda, that are controversial because of their sex appeal, they probably aren't propaganda, okay? They're not trying to sell you that women are attractive, they're trying to sell you attractive women. In the case of gacha games, they are literally trying to sell you attractive women. Moving on, what's really interesting about all of these inaccuracies in biopics and historical fiction is that they have been a topic of discussion for quite some time now, and almost like a byproduct of the inaccuracies, they led to a booming YouTube industry of videos pointing out the differences between the movies and what actually happened in real life. But wait a minute. If there's a lot of people watching these videos and articles to the point that they keep popping up, this means that even when presented with a movie that claims to be based on a true story, people still have their doubts. They do not just absorb and reproduce the information they acquire, but they are also capable of thinking critically about it. Today we live in the information era. And yes, while there is a lot of disinformation going around and people abusing large language models have shown up to make using Google into even more of an absolutely unbearable nightmare, the truth still has never been so easy to reach than right now. You do not need to go out to a library or consult with an expert, though by all means do that as well. But you can also easily check the sources of any statement and see the credentials behind it through a small rectangle that you carry with you at all times. I can easily go to Wikipedia and find evidence that the Highway of Death was not committed by Russians, and then check the citations to see if I can trust them in less than 5 minutes. So why then, in today's era, the easiest time we have ever lived in to fact-check propaganda, an era in which we already went through different systems of censorship and saw how broken those systems were, an era in which we already went through many accusations that video games are satanic or cause violence or anything, and that we have disproven those myths, why do we still have pockets of people loudly complaining about everything in a constant moral panic about whatever is not okay this week? Well, everybody has their own motivation. From a pessimistic point of view, you could say everybody is just chasing clout or virtue signaling or whatever, but I do want to believe some of these people have good intentions and that they're just trying to be a force for good, that they are trying to be moral human beings. And if that hypothesis is correct, I do have at least one theory, or rather, someone much smarter than me has a theory about that. Hey, remember when I mentioned I aligned closer to left-wing politics? Yep, that was a Chekhov's gun. I know what a literary device is, and it's about to go off. Join me in the leftists' favorite hobby as we work together to once again blame capitalism for this shit. More specifically, consumer capitalism. There is actually a brilliant, recently published article by a writer who goes by the name Carly Gomez that's actually about sex in the context of thrillers in Hollywood and how it has disappeared recently and how sex has to heavily justify its own inclusion every time it shows up, unlike other topics in media. It is a brilliant article that you should read on its entirety, but for our purposes I will directly quote only the relevant bits, as this point is explained so elegantly and poignantly that there is simply no better way for me to explain it than just simply directly quoting it to you. The current state of cultural and material decline plays an important role in the shift toward Puritanism in media and art, in consumer appetite, and in the political posture of the state. That is to say, with the compounding crisis we are bombarded with, everything from climate disaster to rampant racialized police violence, to genocide, as a part of our daily lives under late capitalism. The need for escape, and indeed, the need for that escape to be completely unchallenging and non-confrontational, has become imperative. Moreover, as control over our own material realities become less and less feasible, the last lone place we believe we can exercise agency is within the landscape of that which we consume. This has resulted in the consuming public approaching all media and art with a moral imperative. That which we consume must be perfectly virtuous, sanitized of all problematic or complicated ideas and depictions, because it has become the standing for our very realities, our very political action as citizens. Consuming has become our praxis. And a little while later, the article continues with, the desire to exclusively engage with media and art made by unproblematic artists is a direct result of Americans viewing media consumption as an inherently political act, because that is the supreme promise of Western prosperity and the religion of consumerism, and because it's seemingly all that's left. We've been stripped and socialized out of any real political energy and agency. Our ability to consume is the only thing remaining that's ours in late capitalism, and as a result, it's become a standing for, or perhaps the soul-defining quality of, every aspect of being alive today. Consuming is activism, it's love, it's thinking, it's sex, it's fill in the blank. When the act of consuming is all you have left, and indeed the only thing society tells you is valuable and meaningful, the act must necessarily be a moral one. Which is why people send themselves down manic spirals deciding what, who is problematic or not, because for us, the stakes are that high now. Haha, thanks for the daily dose of despair, Gomez, really, thank you. But yeah, I was going to do a shortened explanation of what I've just quoted here, but that honestly feels useless and patronizing. Everything was already explained about as quickly and as in-depth as it should be using those quotes. Look, if you relate to anything from those quotes, all that I can say directly to you, all that I wanna say is that you are not a bad person. Engaging with questionable content does not make you a bad person. Engaging with art, and then that art having something questionable in it that you had no idea was in there when you started, does not make you a bad person. Enjoying that art anyway, even if you dislike some elements of it, does not make you a bad person. Voicing your discomfort does not make you a bad person, and voicing your enjoyment does not make you a bad person either. I know about the power of art. I know that art, especially art that has a clear political message, can inspire us. But just engaging with it, giving it a thumbs up or thumbs down and moving on, is an illusion of activism. In this world where the easiest means of activism seem to be consuming, and with so many streaming services and online game stores, it has never been so easy to simply consume and pretend that we can change the entire world just through interacting with the correct things. But those are sweet lies, whispered by a false god who exists only to take away your potential of enacting real positive change. Consumerism is a false messiah. It can never bring anyone true salvation. There are real people out there struggling who need help, and the real fight will be fought in the real world. Just take a look at all of the layoffs and real-life harassment and disrespect that is currently happening all over the gaming industry. That is a real concern. That is an actual concern. So what can you do to help in the real world? Support game developers, help support all kinds of different artists, unionize your workplace, do volunteer work. If you have some cash to spare, which I know a lot of people do not these days, but if you do, donate to a cause that you find personally important. And if you find something uncomfortable, fight for it, even if you do not want to engage with it. Fight for its right to exist. Fiction is the ultimate safe space in which to explore ideas and concepts, and we must fight for our right to explore ideas that we might find personally problematic, because the alternative is becoming joyless automata living in an eternal comfort zone, regurgitating the same bland, flavorless meal for the rest of eternity. But we can fight against that, and you already know how to fight for it. Always remember, deep in your heart, you can always nut to hot anime girls. It is always morally correct. But like, after you do that, do some actual activism, okay? Like, just positively engaging with media, it is also still not enough. Actually go and do something about problems in real life, okay? Or don't. I'm not your dad, and I might have completely missed the mark. Maybe you actually don't care about real life and you think that some harm is being done by consuming media. Maybe all you want to do is get approval points from your peers by dunking on people on the internet. In which case, carry on. I can't physically stop you from doing that, you know. If that's what you want to do, that's what you want to do. I just feel like there's probably a better way to spend your limited time on this earth, but I also just made an hour-and-a-half long video on a game that I haven't played for 10 years, so I can't judge. So, this is the end, my dear viewers. I'd like to thank you for watching to the very end. Like, if you got through all of my ramblings to this point and you managed to get anything out of them, you can consider yourself a winner at something. Having patience, maybe. I'd like to go on to remind you to like and subscribe if you enjoyed it, and since it is such a complicated topic, let's be real, I probably got a ton of things wrong, so let me know if I got any facts wrong, if you agreed or disagreed, and why in the comments. And psych, you thought it was over? You buffoon! You absolute fool! Because I have one last twist before I'm gonna let you go. This entire goddamn video was a complete waste of your time, and you know why? Because for all of this talk of morality and problematic content and context and media and blah 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 blah, none of this mattered at all. Because at the end of the day, the reason why Skullgirls was censored was very likely just about money. What do I mean by that? Well, a YouTuber by the name of Technical already did 2 excellent videos on the subject of why Lab Zero Games broke down and the lawsuit that ensued after it, and I highly recommend you check them out, because you could come up with a completely different conclusion that I'm going to come up with based on the same facts. And I have to say, this is just a personal theory of mine, so let us put our tinfoil hats on to indicate that this is just my own personal conspiracy theory. So here's what I think happened. I think a lot of people just secretly hated each other's guts in Lab Zero. There seemed to be a lot of animosity, at least between the different teams, with them even having secret Slack channels where they shit on each other secretly, and even schemes being cooked up in order to break off and found their own new companies, because according to Bezo, an artist hired to help with the environmental art that was way behind schedule, the company was a shit show that seemed like it couldn't even properly deliver a game at that point. And in the middle of all of this was Mike Z, an autistic man who made the engine Skullgirls runs on, a dedicated fighting game fan who really seemed to be trying to bring something special to the fighting game space. And things were already bad when they sent away Alex Ahad, the main artist and the one that came up with the IP, halfway through the development cycle of their only other game, Indivisible, which, by the way, was also supposed to be representative of the culture of Alex Ahad, so I would be very surprised if it also didn't have a very large hand on it, and the game was having a very rough development cycle. The state of things was not good for the company, so they started doing pitches to publishers. None of the pitches went through though, except eventually one actually caught the attention of publisher Focus Home Entertainment. Bezo made a pitch with the help of, guess who, Mike Z, as well as a couple other employees, and together they helped secure the funds necessary for the future of the company. But unsatisfied with the project, Mario Cartwright, the lead animator, said her and her team would absolutely not work on the project. A bunch of stuff happened that led to Mike essentially owning 100% of the shares of the company. He said he planned to redistribute all of these shares, but needed legal advice on how to do it without it looking like tax fraud. And then, in the middle of all this mess, the so-called inappropriate DMs he made, which were even inside the company internally doing chats called as simply not that big of a deal, well, they were publicized and all hell broke loose. Tensions were already boiling. People didn't want to work on a new project, people wanted him out of the company for personal reasons, people thought he wouldn't redistribute the shares, so they cooked up the perfect plan. They set up an autistic man to take the fall as a serial sexual harasser and left the company right before they were going to receive the money from Focus in order to bankrupt it so they could keep the Skullgirls IP all to themselves. There is no nice way to say this. This was an absolute scumbag move. So what does a bunch of former Lab Zero employees, now working at the newly renovated Den of Snakes known as Future Club, have to do with censorship? What does all of this mess has to do with censorship? Well, we spent so much time looking at Phileas panties that you might have forgotten, but I did mention that they also censored armbands from Parasol's army in order to avoid comparisons to certain real-life fascist militaries, and also scenes of police brutality were censored from Big Band's story mode. Scenes in which he, a black cop, gets beaten to almost death by traitorous colleagues. But why though? Especially the last one. I don't care what your opinion on the police is, I'm pretty sure corrupt cops murdering anyone is pretty damn high on everybody's immorality list. It's not even solely political at this point, it's just a pretty blatant bad guy indicator. But all of this makes sense if you think like a marketing manager. You see, the people of Future Club are hacks. Talentful hacks, of course. Skullgirls wasn't a solo project, I'm sure they can make some good art, but they're still hacks, because they do not have a single good idea in their heads. Just look at how all of their pitches failed when they were still at Lab Zero. I understand and I sympathize with the artist's struggle to get executives to try out to do something different, but when you tried so many times, only for one of the newest employees in your company to show up and manage to land a pitch? Man, there must have been seriously something wrong going on over there, don't you think? And since they just screwed over Alex Ahad, that they just screwed over Bezo, and they especially screwed over Mike Z, their only claim to fame, the only relevant thing keeping them on the map, is Skullgirls. And since they need a roof over their heads, no shame there, we all need to eat, they probably decided, like I said, this is just a conspiracy theory, but they probably decided to defang Skullgirls and make it as innocent as possible to see if they could bring it out into the spotlight as an inoffensive as possible product to get on the good graces of the FGC, customers, international censorship boards, whatever. They want to milk this cow as much as possible because this cow, this piece of art, which they stole from their original creators, is the only thing they are going to have to put food on the table, at least for a while. And look, I don't know what the future holds, and I don't want this video to age like milk, so I'm not going to pretend that I know what the future of, well, Future Club is going to be. I believe people can change, so even though they just pulled a scumbag move, I hope that they can look back on it and realize that that's not the way to do things, that they can make amends, and I hope they settle things with Mike like they settle things with Alex, and I hope that they move on and that they make a wholesome game that they can be proud of, or that they could more easily sell, or whatever their goal is, and I hope that the game is good, and that everybody can get there happily ever after. But if you want my opinion of how this is going to end right now, right from here at the beginning of 2024, it's probably going to end badly. Not because of any moral reasons or censorship, but because given all of the testimony that I've heard, the management is just incredibly incompetent, and it's a miracle that they managed to deliver 2 games at all. I think they will just milk Skullgirls with additional DLC characters until the end of time, but I wouldn't be surprised if this time next year, Future Club doesn't even exist anymore. Maybe they will pull off a comeback though, you never know. So yeah, we can sit here, discuss the morality of censorship, the way art affects real life or does not. You're wrong, I'm right, I'm wrong, you're right, till the end of time if we want to, but the reality is, we'll both be wasting our times because like everything else under the sun, because just like when companies go gay for a single month before editing out all of the gay from their movies for China, because just like when a AAA gaming company announces their 5th try at a brand new games as a service product, it was never about morality or doing the right thing for society or trying to stand by for their customers. No. Everything was probably just another way to try to milk as much money as possible. This is not even cool, evil capitalism where they try to poison our water with lead and then try to sell us the cure because, you know, at least then I could just die. No, this is just the blandest possible reasoning to deliver the blandest possible product. In the end, despite of how paradoxical it is, given how much an individual needs to give of himself in order to produce genuine art, it's never personal. It's just business. Hello everyone! Happy New Year! I'm sorry I couldn't end the video on a more positive note this time. I want to thank you for having the patience for watching this video to the very end. This is like the epilogue. You don't need to watch this last little bit if you don't want to. I'm just gonna say a lot of stuff unedited and give a little channel update, but really, thank you for watching to the very end and for considering my words. Even if you disagree, I hope you can get something out of this video. It is a mess. You know how people talk about how people make a guy in their heads and then they get mad about that guy that does not exist? Well, I think I might have just made like 100 different guys in my head and discussed censorship with them. It was intense. This video is, I know this is going to sound odd, but this wasn't a video that I really wanted to make, but with the topic of censorship and media literacy and how media affects reality or does not, it just keeps intensifying year by year, and then it finally hit something that I thought would never be hit, which is Skullgirls, which I have precious memories of. Eventually I just had to do something, you know? To let the poison out. Even if I know it's not going to be decensored or anything, I don't think this video is going to accomplish that, but even if it is part of an unpleasant topic, it is ultimately a video about a thing that I like, and what is YouTube made for if not for people talking about things that they like, even when the topic is not exactly pleasant to talk about. And there was also a lot of stuff in this video that got cut. Yes, there was even more stuff that was planned, but ultimately it got cut because I have other projects that I want to get on with, and I have limited time being a humble 9 to 6, yes, a 9 to 6 employee, and a lot of life stuff has been happening, so if videos do not come out soon after this, I take a break or something, then I'm sorry about that. I'll try to get back on YouTube as soon as possible, but man, the schedule from the beginning of next year, Yakuza Infinite Wealth releasing the same week as Persona 3 Reload releasing in the same week, as Grand Blue Fantasy Relink, which is finally being released after 7 years, I think. yeah, the schedule does not look good. And given the size of Yakuza, I know that you're probably thinking, are you going to review that game? Probably yes, but it's going to be released at the end of January. Do not expect a video on it until the end of March. It's gonna be a big game, it's gonna be a big boy. But I also want to take this time to say that one of the things that got cut was a section in which you had talked about the Jaws effect. When the original Jaws movie was released, people were afraid of sharks and stuff. But that I did a little research, a little digging, and I found a cool blog called The Shark Files. Yes, it's a shark blog. Is there anything cooler than that? And they had a really cool article talking about how the Jaws effect might in fact have been exaggerated. And I think I made my point about how much I think fiction affects reality and what we should be watching out for in fiction clear enough that I didn't need an entire section on this, and I didn't want to add like a fourth movie, and I did not want to touch Jaws, because if something is going to get copyright claimed in this video, it was gonna be Jaws. So I kind of just cut the segment, but I'm going to link the blog anyway because I think it's interesting and I think you should read it. There might be even more additional reading, and if the YouTube system does not fail me, you will have seen a lot of recommendations in this video for other videos that add even more context. Ultimately, I just can't tackle the subject. It is long and it is complex, and tomorrow a research could come out that says, no, you moron, actually this is bad, and scientists will have the proof, and if that happens, I'll just have to agree with the experts and say, yeah, no, I guess it is bad. It is an ever-evolving topic, so if you want to discuss this topic in the comments, or if you want to discuss this elsewhere, I gotta be honest, I don't know how online discussions work. I usually just hang around YouTube and occasionally Twitter, which is a bad idea, but I did it anyway. But yeah, do sound off in the comments about what you think. Once again, thank you for watching to the very, very, very end, and I'll see you guys when I see you.